Master Xeon here with part 3 of my video about cyborg modeling. This was the little teaser I made for the chapter sequences. I didn't get to actually put it into the final video because I ran out of time. As you can see, it's already the first. And I still have another part that's due. So I'm just going to put this incomplete 3-parter. However, let's go ahead and begin. Alright, so the render is looking like this as far as where I left off at the final part. And so now we begin. So in this part, I go into Photoshop, begin messing with some of the images. I decided to export the little wallpaper I made for the YouTube banner out. So that way I can use it as a background. And by using a mixed shader on the background between camera ray and the environment texture, I can have the environment lit by the HDRI and have the background be whatever picture I want it to be. So it can be a nice gradient, which I saw on a close-up of a bug, like a still life that someone was working on that was really impressive. And so ever since then I've been doing it. I realized right a moment ago that it was actually showing the wrong image because it just glitches. Still got the defocus, gotta get rid of that. There you go, it almost looks like the Photoshop version, except it's rendering it. So the name is kind of crazy. I want to come up with something different, just real quick. So now back to the texture. And so the helmet texture looks horrible. I'll be redoing that in this video. Also, go ahead and begin texturing the low part of the armor, or actually maybe retexturing it. Let's see, I think I do it right here. I plug it up and it doesn't look pretty at all. So take the cavity and begin tuning it. Right here it's not working out, and that's because it's actually using the wrong image, but I don't know that. I began to realize pretty fast that nodes that I drag out don't actually make the image node of what I'm actually looking at in the UV image editor. So this is something you'll see happening all throughout the video. I think it's a glitch with this test build, but these sort of things, you just gotta recognize it and work around it. I probably sounded like I was crazy earlier, but I have been working on this for quite a while. So here I am making the stains, or the areas that are going to be affected. And so I'm trying to come up with a way to do all these color ramps and multiplies and overlays and still keep the node setup organized so I know what's going on and I don't have to find myself deleting them when I take an intermission and come back. Alright, so right here I'm just mixing a diffuse and a glossy shader, using a cavity to modulate it so some areas look like it's just less shiny. Now I'm using the cavity mask to overlay it with diffuse. I put an invert there, however what I really needed to do was actually just this, switch the node order and then put a color ramp on it to try to grab this value to be exactly where I want it. And so that is definitely looking the way I want. I believe in this one I actually also goof off with it and start making a emission shader out of the splat so it looks like it's glowing. And so I connect it up to displacement, see how that looks. Doesn't look very different. May have to disconnect the color and just go with a shadeless diffuse and see how it changes into view. Go ahead and change half of it to mid-gray so that way the white is raising off the surface. So right here, I believe I was making a mistake. Too much white was beginning to bleed into it, but the look is something that I'm still unsure about. Like I said, I want this particular concept to be different than the actual one that I've been working on slightly. However, I am trying to illustrate the particular workflow that I did use in this model itself. So once again, switching over to the emission so I can see what I'm dealing with here. Alright, now what's going on here is the color isn't actually the color as it's supposed to be. So I plug it up to the emission, what the hell is this? It's not even a color. Look at it, there's the color. And now we plug that in and it's not even looking right now because the alpha is going out. Now we multiply this stuff and we start getting some progress here. And then multiply the cavity on it so there's some interest on the color map to make it look slightly dingy. So as far as texturing goes, y'all could watch me pull out nodes all day, making car paint and all this crazy stuff, mainly metal because this whole thing is cyborg and plastic and matte and whatever else you'd build a robot out of, I guess, nylon, styrofoam, glass. However, all these are pretty hard materials. So for the base paints, I actually just go with a blend swap file. Like I said, in the Blender community, there's tons of talented artists that are just, giving away their files. So, get on blend swap and just check it out. There's plenty of materials and stuff for you to learn from. And so there's no shame in using Creative Commons items. However, you do want to make sure that you're learning from it. So there's the light box, which came up a little fast, so you didn't see it. But basically, to improve my lighting, I'm going to actually import all the objects of the light box except for the box itself. And then I'm going to press L to make it all part of the scene, but undoing it removes it. And now I just give up and put the light box in the scene. Rotate it around so the camera's not occluded. And switch back over to rendered. So with the light box, it actually gives a more interesting lighting setup where the glossy shows highlights of bright items that are in the area, which in this case is the actual lights themselves. So for the cables get just a standard texture of just base metal, no use trying to get an image to fit across a curve. Alright, so a simple anisotropic shader mixed with a glossy will do the job. I just want it to be a little shiny on the furthest faces, and mainly anisotropic on the front facing ones, and that is enough complexity to make it interesting. I try messing with some images. Images don't make a whole lot of difference. So now for this, similar to the cloth texture, I also grabbed some image off of the internet, and let's open that up and take a look at it. Not that. And it would be this mesh right here. So after scaling it up in the UV image editor, I get a decent amount of circles on it. Got to go look at Reddit. So like I said, dragging the image from the UV editor to the node editor doesn't create the actual image that you're looking at. It creates some image node of just random images. So that's something that I keep fighting with all throughout the video. And so for the displacement, I just pretty much wanted it to displace the circles in the middle from the outer edges, which basically is done by clamping it. And then of course I take that and let's see, I believe this is actually a metal texture that I took, and now I'm just multiplying it over the top of this whole map to try to break up the repetition of the repeating texture, which is another important thing. If you're going to use a repeating texture, you can also, have another stencil texture on top of that that's making some more complex material that isn't so repetitive to just break it up and make it look more original. And so right here I import the car paint. For the car paint, it's just glossy, hooked up to glossy, hooked up to glossy, coupled up with a white glossy. It's something that I still don't quite understand myself. However, as far as the way car paint material works, I guess it requires a bunch of similar glossies just all mixed on top of each other, which is not the way that I even think when it comes to cycles materials. But these materials come out looking very good. So it's easier, just get them from Blend Swap. Using Shift B, I'm able to render half the screen, so now I'm just doing a partial screen render. I'll let that sit for a moment. Now, as you can see, the bottom part looks fantastic, the middle part also looks fantastic, but the helmet looks hideous. So, in a moment I'll get fed up with it and go and fix that. So I just go back on CG Textures, look up some random image. Let's see, and what I'm looking for is an image that's pretty even in values all around the image for me to use as just a basic type of noise. So for this, I open up GIMP. I've been using Photoshop a lot, but GIMP is still my boy, Got to stay up on the GIMP. So open up GIMP, drop my image in there. And this is my favorite part right here. So under image transform, nope. Under image transform offset, you can offset it by the power of 2. Now, I'll pause it right here and just explain what you're looking at. So basically the image has taken an offset which took the edges, which were not seamless, and now offset those to be in the middle. So the problem you used to have to deal with on the edges for making seamless textures is now a problem you solve in the middle. So guess what? All you gotta do is just make it look right here in this X, and voila, you get a seamless texture. So continuing. Now, whenever it comes to making textures or personalizing them for models, you definitely want to spend some time going in a 2D image editor to really perfect it. You can go on the internet and find an image and a starter image, and I'll get you a part of the way there. But it's really the combination of the modifications that you bake from the geometry out into maps that you multiply on top of the textures that you overlay, with the colors, of course, being screened, that you begin to get complex textures that actually are interesting to the viewer. Um, I'm the last person to actually talk to you about decent textures, and texture is my least favorite thing. But me personally, I find that texturing gets better if you just force yourself to do it, which is obvious. But the other thing is that usually I model a character, I come out with a pretty nice clay, and I just leave it at that. Model complete. Continue on with the rest of my complex setup that I'm making. Alright, so you of course know what I'm doing here, using the color ramps to just clamp it to be hard black and hard white. By using hard black and hard white, I'm able to real easily multiply a screen and overlay these to get a real solid mask. And for, chipped paint and stains and stuff like that, you'd want it to be fairly sharp on the surface, so that way it looked like it actually is on it instead of spreading out and growing thin, which I guess would work if I was going for something more fluid based, but I'm not. I lost my train of thought there. It's kind of hard talking to a sped up video. So right here I began goofing off with the emission shader. And changed my mind about it. Now, believe in a moment, I also get fed up with the color scheme, and I decide to go into Photoshop and actually get something better than this baby blue, Tigger orange, and pearl white, which altogether doesn't really have any sort of color psychology to the viewer or any harmony together, really, for this sort of image. For someone else, it just doesn't match the concept. So that also will come under some changes. Same with all the texturing that's happening here. I changed the textures all throughout the tutorial series to make them all fit together. So that's why it's good to figure out a scheme of understanding your nodes, because after a day of not doing it, or 2 days, or a week, you want to be able to come back and look at this and know where you left off. There's a picture from Photoshop that I'm working on. I mean the banner picture. And so I actually think this actually looks pretty good. Like, it looks like it was hit with paint that dried, and this is where it starts just getting weird. So I decided I want to make the diffuse different colors, change it to be an emission, put in a layer weight to make the strength higher as it's facing you, which actually was a horrible idea. I don't know what I was expecting it to accomplish. so the goal here is to, of course, light it up using just the emission here. So since my computer is so slow, if I just left it sitting there, it takes about 20 minutes to just show us something that we'd be changing immediately. So that's one of the things that kind of gets on my nerves about cycles with just CPU, but you know, that I'll do something about that eventually. In fact, if I win, I'll be able to do something about it immediately. So I'm actually digging this look right here, and this was when everybody started coming to my room and looking at it and began liking it. So we'll just mix these emissions, try to make it a different color in the front facing emission than in the back by using a facing layer weight. So as you can see, I use this thing quite a bit. It's one of my favorite nodes because no matter which way you're facing, you get that same look, and it's kind of like using a normal node. But it's just easier. It's just a slider. So in between part 5 and part 6, while I was waiting on it to allow me to record again, I just took the emission group that I made in the last part and made it into a group that I then added with the other materials as a group and used it to replace the diffuse that was making the stains. And so therefore it gave it the look of glowing. Now the connector was something else I was going to build in the video. However, it's nothing real fancy. It was just a connector port that I wanted to make to look like a ripped off arm that I built during work and textured. And so I built that solely for the purpose of bringing that in to cover the nubs and make it look a little more interesting in that area. Now the little nubs here also have a color scheme that I end up taking and using on the rest of the items because, like I said, the baby blue, tiger orange, and pearl white just didn't cut it for me. And I still don't know why I even picked those colors to begin with, but that's besides the point. Continuing on. So at this point, I'm just playing with the light box. There's some strangeness with some of these items. I didn't exactly investigate the file to see how the pieces were built, but it looks like it's a pretty tight hierarchy. But I'd end up going in and taking the lights and just lowering the intensity so it wouldn't have such a strong effect on the overall lighting of the image, because in the middle of the head is supposed to be an illuminated jewel, and I wanted that to do most of the lighting for the image. So that's why the HDRI is turned down so low as well. So for this segment, you see me go into Photoshop, and I just start separating the colors, which is pretty easy using the wand and select similar. However, it begins breaking up the paint and looking very bad. And I wasn't sure exactly why this was happening, which I guess it was something due to either the texture map being 2048 and the items being placed of that size, or something with anti-aliasing, or just me and the selection tool and not using the modify modify edge and smoothing it out or feathering it or whatever was being needed to be done. But just know that I end up making a texture map that I end up later in getting rid of. Alright, so at this point, I decide that, hey, the jagged textures are looking pretty cool. Maybe it looks like a crayon, so maybe I should stick with it and see if having a robot looking like it was shaded by a 4-year-old would look cool. Spoiler alert, it doesn't, but I still go and try it anyways. Also duplicate the layers, blur it with the Gaussian, and then just lower the opacity over it to make it fit on it, which also doesn't work. From there, I create some noise, multiply it, lower the opacity to try to just change up the way the texture was looking. Save this out as Helmet Tut R1. And that's what it looks like right now. Now, because of the Boltzn color scheme, I think this device is starting to look like some sort of like nuclear hair dryer, but after changing the colors, that gets sorted out. So Photoshop crashes, serves it right. Should have been using GIMP, but that's okay. I got a texture. So I learned a lesson with the last texture, and on this one I think I'll separate the colors a little bit more intelligently and actually go in, smooth it, and just, choke it up and get it to look right. And that's exactly what I do. So all the colors get separated, smoothed out on their selections, so that way I can easily paste them to be a different color. So Photoshop has its advantages compared to GIMP. GIMP doesn't have the modify selection tools that Photoshop has, which I think makes using Photoshop a little bit easier. GIMP's still my favorite application because its icon's a little dog, and Photoshop just doesn't even have an icon. And so I bring in the other texture. I just sample the colors. So I drop a metal texture in there that I got from CG Textures, um, change the blend mode to be multiply, and then I take the cavity as well, delete the black border, and by cramming the levels I'm able to get just the darkness on the edges, and by changing it to multiply I can just darken the texture. So that's a much better, more intricate looking texture than it was before, like dingy metal. So this one will be the body texture R2, and so we export that and go in here and bring it back into Blender. And this is what the armor is looking like so far. So the helmet's still going to have to be redone, but the lower body armor is definitely looking a lot better. The colors that are on the arm connectors are a little bit off, but I think I can get away with that. And so I paused the video and then let it render for a bit and come back up. And now we see that the render's looking a lot better. So we're getting through this thing and just about done. So I go into layer 3, which is layer 10, which is my item world, duplicate the item that I want, take it to layer 3, which is empty, and I just start manipulating it to make the front face visor. So with the array and the curve and the simple deform, I started getting some madness, so I played with it for a moment. More madness, so getting the object to deform along the curve can be a little bit painful if the rotation is not absolutely correct and you don't have the right deformation axis selected. But it's something that just a little bit of tweaking will get the hang of. So the top of the circles are crammed again, but since it's all an array, I can just stretch that up in edit mode using a proportional editing tool. So I keep it on the curve as long as I can, so that way it'll be easy to rotate and I still have that local axis as a level of control. So the goal is to make the visor be just in the front of the head and fit snugly inside of it. And since I stretched it down the wrong axis, it moved it out of track, but now they're stretched out correctly. We'll apply the array, and from here just tweak the curve, see what that gets us. Doesn't get us anything. We'll just put a solidify on it, and that looks like it's obscuring the entire face. So we'll shrink it, we'll scale it, we'll move it up so at least the lips are showing, but we still want it to be a pretty good sized guard. So now I realize that this lighting rig had some sort of light box that has been hiding in the middle of the scene, waiting to haunt me. And worse than that, it's unselectable, so I have to find it. And worse than that, it's the child of a child of a child. So that's one of the other things that you probably want to look into your files about before importing all the assets into another blend file, is just how it's laid out. But finding it in the outliner is not that bad. Just look for the icon of a arrow and select it or unselect it. So now it's just moving the curve, make it around the mask a little bit. Around the visor. Still trying to keep it smooth. Go ahead and remove the bolts, they're useless. Now the goal of this particular Android is to make it look like it was junked, not that it was built of junk. So now to cover the top part of the chest and the neck, I'll go ahead and just drop in a plane, start retopoing, change the origin point to share the same as the body with Control-Alt-Shift-C. And then Shift-Tab to turn on my snapping, Control-Shift-Tab to choose my snapping mode and make it a phase. Turn on X-ray so it can annoy me by showing me all the geometry on both sides. And we'll just snap that to the head. To the neck. Duplicate, scale, move to fit. And more fitting. And of course in the concept the jaw also had a covering. So we'll go ahead and just shrink wrap a series of planes onto that. Even it out. Gotta watch it with the project. Sometimes it'll get wacky. Right here, a little bit of geometry playing to get things to just straighten out a little bit. We want even quads, however, we also want the form to turn correctly with the adequate amount of geometry so that the subdivision doesn't smooth it so bad that it perforates the mesh. We'll solidify, flip these normals, make these meet in the middle, separate by loose parts. I'll go back into my default view because I don't know what I'm doing. Take the pieces I just made, go back into edit mode. So for this, you want to start off applying a mirror, then apply to solidify, delete the interior faces, and then of course, just clean up random geometry mistakes that you see. Inset extrude, add an inset, more bevels. There we go, nice crisp angles. Put a couple of edge loops at the top to harden up the form. Delete that interior face. Interior loops, delete, interior loops, and there we go. So there's one more piece we got to mess with here. And same thing, interior face is gone. Inset extrude. Inset extrude. Delete that edge loop, delete that edge loop. And it's just the same technique I've been using this entire series. So right here I'll try to make the edges look a little bit harder so that way it just catches light in a more interesting way during the render. Play with the edge split. And let's see. Now with this in place, we can get rid of these placeholder neck bracelets, but looks like I still got to mess with these dingo lights. Get rid of the neck collar, scale it up, try to make it fit, go in local mode, try to make it fit, you know, might make a neck brace out of it. Now this module has now been protected against neck breaking injuries, but it doesn't fit into the equation. We'll go ahead and just remove it. Portional editing tool, pull the neck out of the way so we don't have to adjust the neck segments. So for this part, I begin unwrapping the wing, which turned out to be a much bigger pain than I initially anticipated. So for the gear, basically when I'm cutting this stuff apart, I always just think of it as if I'm trying to lay it out in on a sheet of paper in a way that I can fit in an envelope to send it to a person, which is kind of a complex way to think about UVs, but gets the job done. So you just want to put enough seams where they can be hidden by the texture, but still encompass enough to the model that there's not issues with it breaking or, you know, the seams just being visible after a subdivision, since it does shrink your UVs. So for the UV unwrapping, I just always just break it down into small pieces, individually unwrap them, perfect it, and then just unhide everything and then just go for it in the end. So the large wing here was probably the most painful part of the unwrapping process, but by handling it piece by piece, I was able to get it done in a pretty organized fashion. However, at the end of this video, by the end of the video, I still don't get it right. So that's where I'll be picking up whenever it continues. But I still fiddle around with it for a moment. So I'm trying to figure out what's going on here. Can't figure it out. Just go ahead and delete them. Let's just fill some faces in. Put in some edge loops. Merge verts. Business as usual. Fix all those verts together, and then put a seam right on top of them. And it still doesn't unwrap properly. And then on top of that, the little area for the thrusters on the wings don't really have a directional nozzle for it to rotate on. So that's a pretty big design flaw. So that's what this little part's for. And we'll just add this to it before we do the final UV cavity bake texture madness. And just get it out of the way. So keep in mind that whenever you're scaling, if you hold shift and then press the letter of the axis that you wish to not use, that it will exclude that from your scaling process, enabling you to scale up a cylinder on all axes without making it longer or fatter if you actually didn't want to. So I don't know what this part's going to be used for. I just built it. However, I figured having a tube sticking out of the end might enable it to have some sort of other purpose. Go ahead, UV unwrap it. That way I can just clone and put it everywhere it needs to be. Join all these together, delete all the interior vertices. In retrospect, I probably should have bridged all of those, but instead that's unnecessary. Just connect them up. And we'll just take certain pieces that deserve priority and just scale those to be adequate size, as well as move larger components that are in the small parts UV map area out of the way. However, at this point I do realize that the UV unwrapping still has some problems in this area, which I couldn't figure out exactly what type of unwrapping scheme it was actually trying to use. But by using Smart UV Project, I was able to get that sorted out. And since it's just the interior, I thought maybe I could get away with just putting it right there. Didn't fit. Maybe I could get away with just putting a little bit of that stuff there. You know, that fits, kinda, you know, maybe that fits, you know, kinda move that out the way. And this part will just fit right here in this blank area. We'll merge those since they have no reason to be apart. So now I try to give it a UV map just to see how bad the stretching is. Whenever it comes down to the point of duplicating it, hiding the original, and then choosing the cavity texture that was made in order to bake it, it actually did not work out and would not bake. After all the tries, it would not bake. And this was something I thought was some sort of issue with the software. However, it turned out that I had vertices hidden in the image editor and it didn't allow me to apply an image as a result of that. So that's just some of those noob mistakes that can get you fouled up. And then on top of that, those vertices that were hidden had actually been hidden so long that they didn't even get UV coordinates. So it was like a big plane of like 16 vertices all assigned to the same vertex in the UV image editor on an image that I couldn't even recall because it was hidden so long. But I still try to bake it, you know, I don't give up. Except in a moment where I give up. Not baking again. So, you know, right here I started, you know, breaking out in a sweat. Started wondering what else there was to do in the world today. And that does it.